Our nation faces unprecedented global security threats. The call to strengthen our defense has never been more urgent. Here in Washington this August, NDIA answers that call with leading government industry and university experts, meeting here to match threats to capabilities.
Everybody you talk to at the NDIA Emerging Technologies Conference is really motivated to understand these technologies and issues better so that they're more capable to deal with them as new problems arise.
Can I take your information?
For NDIA government partners, these conferences are the most efficient and cost-effective gatherings to discover state-of-the-art solutions under one roof.
It is indeed. I'd say it's a one-stop shop, especially with the focus on the manufacturing industrial base.
By coming to this conference is get to talk to many industry partners. If they tried to do this and go to each and every of the companies of the 1,000 people who are here this year, you can't do it. But on a clock where you can do that, come here 2.5 days and really have that interaction, start the conversation. NDIA, one of our big things is keeping those conversations going.
Industry, academia, and government decision makers collaborating in real time on the most challenging national security issues.
You don't win by playing defense in tech. You have to aggressively move forward. You have to cannibalize your own product with a better product before somebody else cannibalizes you. You win by creating something that the other guy can't keep up with.
The Engineering Research and Development Center says the NDIA Expo member connections help everyone advance their technology.
It allows them to see things that maybe they didn't know was out there. And it also gives me the opportunity to talk about, well, there's 6 other laboratories than we have.
We're excited to be here. It's a great way to connect with people that we haven't connected to before.
This is a great example of when you can bring kind of all 3 parties together.
Decision makers, innovators, researchers, one-on-one breakout sessions.
It was more than 200 projects.
All under one roof.
Unclassified to secret to top secret.
The nation's premier military and technology leaders collaborate to bring lethality, readiness, and overmatch capabilities to our warfighters and the civilians who support them.
So you'll see that cool university working on the latest quantum computing. You'll see some small business who's turning that quantum computing into an actual product. You'll see a big old system integrator, a big defense prime who's turning it into a big system.
Join us at the NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference and Exhibition, August 27 to 29 in Washington, D.C. to be part of the mission-critical, legal, ethical, and efficient dialogue that will shape our nation's security future. Visit ndiatechexpo.org to learn more.
Hello, and welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Seraphin, the Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. Today we're going to be joined by George Dougherty to discuss his soon-to-be-released book, Beast in the Machine: How Robotics and AI Will Transform Warfare and the Future of Human Conflict. Dr. Dougherty is a retired Air Force colonel, including working in the Air Force Science and Technology Enterprise, as well as DOE's Lawrence Livermore Lab and a bunch of other places in the national security environment. He's since retired and is now a consultant and, of course, a writer. In this episode, we're going to preview his forthcoming book, Beast in the Machine, cover some of the main takeaways in the book. We're going to discuss what the future of robotic and drone warfare will look like, hear some stories about robotic warfare from the past, and talk about what the Pentagon should be doing moving forward. Additionally, we're going to talk about limitations in AI-enabled robotics and systems. So for all of that, George, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, glad to be here, Arun. Thanks for having me.
So I didn't do your resume justice at all. Tell me about your background and how you became an expert in the field of robotics and AI warfighting. What led you to write this book?
Right. Well, I guess I do have a little bit of an interesting background. It's kind of a 3-legged stool. You know, there aren't many folks who were both military officers, PhD engineers, and business strategists. So when I started out, I was an officer in the Air Force, commissioned out of ROTC, and worked in the Science and Technology Enterprise at Air Force Research Laboratory and so on. After a few years, I went to go do my doctorate. So I got my PhD in engineering at Berkeley. And at that point, I went into the reserve. And so I had a parallel military and civilian career using both my my reserve military time and my time in the private sector. First at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, as you described, doing engineering research. After a few years there, I decided to go back and get my MBA. And so after doing my MBA at Cornell, I joined, I worked for 2 different international management consulting firms, basically doing business strategy for high-tech and life science companies, most of which were trying to grapple with technological change or some type of strategic market threat to themselves. And that really gave me a tremendous interest, once again, in trying to see how we could apply some of those same learnings to my Air Force job as I went back and forth. So I came back on active duty for a while in 2017 to help write the Air Force S&T 2030 strategy, which rejiggered the entire Air Force S&T portfolio to get after things like the Vanguard programs. I was the deputy director of 2 different directorates of the Air Force Research Laboratory, the senior military leader for the Office of Emerging Capability and Prototyping in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And so I've held the second highest military position in Air Force science and technology, and climbed the ranks on the commercial management consulting world as well. So that's really what brought me to the point where I think I was in the position to write a book like this.
And the subject matter that you decided to go after, what made you think this was the time for that, and why a book and not just a podcast?
Yeah, so that actually grew out of that experience I had going back and forth between corporate boardrooms and the Pentagon or R&D laboratories in the DoD. It was quite jarring, actually. On the commercial side, my teams and I would oftentimes be at a headquarters of a Fortune 500 company, and they really seemed to live by CEO of Intel, Andy Grove's admonition that only the paranoid survive, right? In the tech industry, most realized that their companies got to be where they were because they caught another competitor napping or missed a big technology transition, and they themselves were quite paranoid that they would become the victims of the next company that would come and take their place. And so we often found ourselves working, 80 hours a week, pulling, all-nighters at corporate headquarters, crawling to vending machines for late night dinners, trying to help them develop plans to stave off that kind of threat. When I would change back into my military uniform, I was struck by the fact that there was such a tsunami of technological threat coming at the US Defense Department, but nobody seemed to be really focusing on it. In fact, during those days, everyone was so consumed with Iraq and Afghanistan that technological threat just didn't seem like something they needed to worry about urgently. But I started putting together some thoughts on that. I published some papers in defense journals, trying to help the DoD get after some of these emerging technological challenges, including unmanned systems and so forth. But after a while, I thought, at some point, somebody's really going to want to get the real full picture of, what is really going on, where is it going, and what should we do? And so I really took it upon myself to start putting that together, and ended up writing a book that was not just for defense leaders, but really for everyone, because this is something that's not going to impact just the Pentagon, national security space. It's going to really impact all citizens, and everybody really has an interest in it.
I'm curious, the title, Beast in the Machine, where'd you get the idea for the title? What are you trying to tell us?
So the title, actually, it has 2 meanings that come up in the book. So initially, it's a reference to Nikola Tesla's concept for the first mobile robot, which he invented, called the teleautomaton, 1898. I really make it's interesting that robotics itself as a field was invented with warfighting in mind, as when he came out with that first remote-controlled robot, which wowed his audiences. They'd never seen anything like that before. That he said that its most obvious application is going to be in armaments and warfare. And he described it that it was basically an artificial beast, if you will, because it had the organs and the functions that a living beast has. Sensing, right? It has to be able to have the ability to perceive something about its environment. Actuation, which is the ability to move or otherwise, take some physical action. And then what he called that higher principle, which was the information processing part, which was something that will allow it to determine what action to take in the circumstances. So that metaphor of the beast as a machine is something that he saw as basically the genesis of the entire field of robots. We don't think of them that way anymore, but really the whole history of robotics has been about starting from that basic idea. And those three elements still are the components of a robot. The second meaning comes up much later in the book when we get into AI and morality and autonomous systems. And it goes back to Gilbert Ryle's book, The Ghost in the Machine, talking about the duality of mind and body in humans. But really what it talks about is the danger of trying to, let's say, translate and embed the really unique human savage impulse to war and violence, which is something not even animals other than humans exhibit, and trying to get an AI system to comprehend, if you will, and be able to act upon the intent of that impulse and the danger that it presents.
So it's programming a robotic system with the warlike nature of humans that's a bit of what you're referring to as the beast in the machine.
Right, trying in a sense to transplant the beast within ourselves into a machine which can act on our behalf.
So, it's a great book. I had the chance to read the whole thing here. What are for the viewers here? What are some of the main themes that you want them to take away? What is the biggest takeaway?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that this coming transition of robotics and AI is coming to warfare. It's not anything that we can postpone at this point or deny, but it's really much bigger than most of us, even in the defense industry, really have absorbed yet, and we're absolutely not ready for it. I look back to the early part of the 20th century as an analog for the time that we are in now, and there were similar transitions happening then with the onset of industrialization and mechanization, and we were able to navigate those because of the deep thinking that an awful lot of thinkers did in the interwar period that led to things like air power theory, armored maneuver theory, things that led to, say, blitzkrieg, strategic bombing. All the things that basically won the next war were all things that were thought of and worked on proactively. And we really need to kickstart that process of proactive thinking and theorizing, if you will, about the robotic revolution, because as it is, we are still very much in a reactive mode. We are being driven by the innovations of others, right? So much of the discussion is about drones, and especially small drones, and what should we do about them and so forth. We're not driving that discussion. Those were invented by ISIS and introduced in 2017, right? And being driven by countries like Ukraine, which were never major military powers before. So what the whole book really is about is attempting to lay out what the real driving factors are, what we should be paying attention to, so that we can, in effect, skate to where the puck is going and become the masters rather than the victims of this change.
And I love the way that the book taps into your technical background, because it has some real deep technology discussion in it, but also your military background. So there's a lot on both the strategic and the tactical level of combat operations, as well as the industrial and market sense of some of this. And on top of all that, the policy overlay. And so you do a great job of weaving all that together into the book, but that then brings me to ask, well, who's the audience here?
Yeah, well, this is really a book for everyone, right? I mean, I think I tried to find the sweet spot because, there are a lot of thinkers, leaders, decision makers in the defense world that really, should be thinking along these lines. And I'm trying to inspire them and all their staffs to really get out ahead and, as I say, start skating to where the puck is going rather than to where it's been. But at the same time, this is a threat that it is likely not only to affect everyone involved in the national security space, but it is transformational enough that it is likely to overturn the entire industry, so to speak, of global defense. And it goes back to looking at earlier transitions, like I say, about the onset of mechanization and industrialization, which turned out to be not just a military phenomenon, right? That transformed everything. And as we are seeing it today, there's a lot of fretting about how the character of warfare is changing. But just like in the commercial world, robotics and AI are just starting to have their effects on military affairs. We are only seeing the very beginning of the first wave, and there's so much more yet to come. So, this is a book, it's action-packed. No one has said that it's not exciting, right? Everyone who's read it, it's so full of combat tales, and everything in it is really filtered through the fire of combat, because that's where the truth really comes out, and the good ideas are separated from the bad ones. But there's a lot of gripping, page-turning type stuff in here, which I think will appeal to everybody.
Yeah, and I think the public will be educated by some of the stories from the past and some of the current capabilities, even from the recent past. The Pentagon staffers who are thinking about things like the requirements process, things like the resourcing process, can learn a lot about past trajectory, future trajectories of these kinds of robotic systems. And then in my old life, being a congressional staffer, where you're in a position to think about authorizations and appropriations and regulation of systems like this, I think there's a lot in this book to help people understand and help their bosses understand where this technology is going. In terms of, it being a timely book, this is absolutely ripped from the headlines, what's going on today. And the story I wanted you to touch on for me is the use of drones these days in the war in Ukraine. Recently, we saw this unprecedented attack carried out by Ukraine on Russia's strategic bombing force using, as I understand it, fully autonomous drones. So tell us a little bit about that event and how it tells us something about where we are on the use of drones and autonomous systems today.
Yeah. You're talking about Operation Spiderweb, the attack on the Russian strategic bomber airfields. Yeah, that was in early June. That was really dramatic. For those of you who don't know, it was a covert attack with shipping containers full of small FPV drones that were brought deep into Russian territory near Russian strategic bomber air bases. The drones basically were launched from the top of the shipping containers and one by one directed into the airfields and took out a whole significant number, let's say, of the Russian bomber fleet. Very impressive, totally caught the world by surprise. Shouldn't have caught the world by surprise. They are actually predicting things like this for quite a while. In fact, there was a study by the Naval Postgraduate School in 2006 that built a system just like that, and they had published it and said, can you imagine what would happen if a $300, what they called aerial IED like this, was used to take out a $200 million C-17? They had pointed out that was a real possibility. Of course, that warning went unheeded, but now that's exactly what the Ukrainians are doing. But it's a great illustration of, as I say, trying to look at the big picture. What we're seeing in Ukraine is the onset of the first wave of the robotic revolution, which is really a 100 to 1,000x increase in weapon lethality due to precision. And that example is a great example where you could take a weapon that would have been far too small to do any damage in the past, but because of the nature of the small drone and the lack of expense that it entails, that makes it so accessible, has made that a very handy way to get one shot, one kill precision, even against a very large target, right? And that's really what the entire Ukrainian story has been up to this point, whether it's Javelin missiles versus tanks, whether it's bomb-dropping drones versus troops on the ground, or whether it's FPV drones versus armor and now versus aircraft, and even in some cases versus ships with the sea drones. This is the first wave of the robotic revolution, which is moving towards universal precision, when every type of weapon, even down to individual small arms, is getting that one shot, one kill capability. And that revolution in lethality is driving all the subsequent changes that we're going to see in the future.
And so you see this then not just limiting itself to Ukraine, but potentially proliferating to all future conflicts, because I guess the combination of we've got this incredible ability to use technology to precisely control the positioning of things in time and space, just better and better and better all the time, combined with advances in microelectronics and manufacturing. I can make these things pretty cheaply.
Very cheaply.
And so even your exquisite strategic bomber force or your exquisite fleet is going to be vulnerable to this form of mass asymmetric attack. Is that fair?
That is fair. In fact, that's the real challenge for us, right? If you're looking at the strategic threat, that's something that we haven't fully grappled with yet. The onset of these small, accessible, yet very capable weapons, maybe not as capable as the exquisite high-end systems that the US and other leading countries use, but capable enough to do real damage, even against a high-end opponent. It's very similar in many ways to the onset of the personal computer, to the mainframe computer industry in the 1970s, right? Those early PCs, they were not a one-for-one substitute for a big mainframe. But what they did allow is for many, many other buyers to get into the computing business, right? If you were a big Fortune 500 company or a federal agency that was happy with your mainframe, you might stick with your mainframe. But now all of your competitors, small businesses, schools, individuals, all had a computer on their desk too, right? And that transformed the industry to the point that by the time those mainframe makers realized that the PC was not just a toy, it was actually the new wave of the entire industry that was going to wash them out of business, it was too late for them to adapt. I like to point out that all of the technological revolutions that we have led as the United States or adopted very quickly from others like Germany were all things that depended upon the tremendous infrastructure and capability of our military industrial complex and built upon it. The aircraft carrier, the ICBM, nuclear weapons, stealth, all of those things could not have been developed by any other country. And they added to our predominance. These small robotic weapons that we're seeing that are changing warfare in Ukraine, in Nagorno-Karabakh, in the war in 2020, and now in a lot of other places around the world that are flying under the radar, but are also cropping up. Those were fielded not by any leading power, right? ISIS, as I say, developed the first armed drones. Ukraine, one of the poorest countries in Europe, Azerbaijan, whose robotic campaign crushed Armenia in 44 days. They were one of the first to really put all these weapons together with a war plan, let's say, and a doctrine to really capitalize on their advantages. A tiny country, right? 60th in the world for military spending. These robotic weapons are the great leveler, the great equalizer. We are used to being the big dog on top of the hill of military dominance. That marketplace of advanced military capability that we are used to dominating is likely to get very crowded soon.
And those stories, I particularly loved the way you told the story of what happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the way that the robotic systems were used to win that conflict so quickly. That points out that despite, we're right now, there's a lot of people talking about drones and robotics use on the battlefield, but it's really nothing new from a combat perspective. You talk about Tesla, just bringing this up in the early days. Tell me just one or two of your favorite historical anecdotes that are in the book.
Oh yeah, no, the history of robotic warfare is spectacular, and so much of it is, there's so many great untold stories here, for history buffs like myself. But one of the things that I was surprised that nobody knows is that the largest tank battle in World War II, the Battle of Kursk, still probably the largest tank battle in history, was spearheaded by unmanned robotic ground vehicles. How do we not know that, right? But it's true. The German attack on the Russian lines was actually spearheaded with, they were the most advanced tanks in the German army were a small number of Tiger tanks and what they called Ferdinand tank destroyers, really powerful offensive maneuver vehicles. But they were teamed with a smaller number of unmanned breaching vehicles, the Borgward B4s, and the radio-controlled Panzer units that controlled them, that actually sent them out ahead as screens to draw enemy fire, identify where their positions were, identify and take out minefields. And they were armed, right? They were used to blow holes in obstacles, destroy enemy anti-tank guns, all those kinds of things. That scale of basically human-machine teaming in active combat is still bigger than anything we have seen in ground combat in our own time. And the lessons from that are important for determining, what we should do and what we shouldn't do when we try to do that today. Similarly, I was equally impressed by the secret United States assault drone units that were operating in the Pacific in World War II against Japan. Those were secret until the 1960s, when finally their files were opened, and they didn't really get noted even by the Navy until the 1990s. But they blazed the trail for so many things. FPV drones, basically, that was a concept that came from them. They were the first to use drones in the suppression of enemy air defense. They basically set all kinds of landmarks for unmanned systems in combat, especially in the air domain, that haven't been matched in many ways even until today.
So you have a World War II system which is teleoperated?
Yes.
Cameras on it or something?
That's right. So in that case, the assault drones had a camera, a TV camera in the nose, one of the earliest TV cameras that there was. And just like we use an FPV drone today to fly them into a target, a crew in an accompanying Avenger bomber that had radio control equipment and a television receiver on it would look through that FPV camera, steer the bomb-laden assault drone into the enemy target, just like you would with an FPV drone today. Except, unlike an FPV drone, they had the ability to fly over a target, drop some of the bombs on one target, and then fly the remaining drone kamikaze style into a second target. So they did a lot of incredible things with pretty primitive technology. So in some ways, a lot of the basic concepts keep getting reinvented again and again, just with more advanced technology.
And now, fast forward to today, there's concern with how both China and Russia are taking advantage of this technology and the advances in all of the supporting technologies that lead to better drones and better robotics. What do you feel like does the emerging threat environment look like that we might face with those kinds of peer actors?
So this is really important. The immediate threat is this first wave of the robotic revolution, right? Which is universal lethality. They are going after some of that in a much bigger way, right? Already Russia, you see, responding to what they're seeing in Ukraine, producing drones and other precision weapons at low cost and large volume at an incredible scale to keep up with them. We aren't necessarily doing that yet, although we are getting after it, which is good. But that is the most immediate threat where we could get caught napping or reacting too slow to that first wave of the robotic revolution. And so we have to make sure we don't get stuck there. But that is really a path into a dead end, kind of a box canyon for the military, because what that leads to is just attrition warfare. And I already see a lot of that being discussed in the military press about we need more mass, we need more scale, we need more numbers. Those are all attrition warfare concepts. And while it's true that as long as you're in that first phase, just like in World War I, we were with the onset of high firepower munitions like machine guns and indirect fire heavy artillery, you don't want to be in that kind of war for very long, right? It's extremely nasty, and victory goes to the side basically that can survive being beat up and bled out the longest, right?
And that's Ukraine right now.
It is, right. And both sides in that war have attempted to end the war with maneuver, right? By capturing large pieces or recapturing large pieces of territory. But maneuver has been completely shut down because of that 100 to 1,000x increase in the weapon lethality due to universal precision, which is just coming on. And so what you get is that static attrition warfare, which is, it's brutal on the ground. And it's also very bad from a national standpoint, right? Because it just bleeds both belligerents of their national wealth, their demographics. We don't want to get into a contest of who can take the most punishment and damage and loss before we just crack economically, politically, socially. That's not a game that I think any Western democracy wants to be in. So what we need to think ahead to is, why did we not get stuck in that kind of war permanently before? right? It's because those thinkers in the 20s and 30s thought a step ahead and said, hey, maybe what we need to do is start applying some of these technologies more holistically to reinvent and reimagine the way we conduct maneuver warfare in a way that's not just, say, a horseless version of something that existed before, but something that really gets at the inherent capabilities that are given to us by this new revolution. In those cases, it was the airplane and it was the tank, things that were never part of warfare before. There was never a horseless or a horse-drawn airplane, but that new maneuver platform was what allowed us to break that static attrition warfare model and lead to the dominance that the U.S. then, after World War II, enjoyed for many decades. We need to be doing the same thing today, and some of the concepts that I put forward in the book try to push us in that direction, such as the control of the atmospheric littoral, which is a concept that I first published in 2019 and is really starting to get traction now.
Yeah, you even get into some of the ways we can best develop the systems and be sure they're what we need on the battlefield, things like the experimental units, right? Are you more worried that the Chinese and Russians will, I guess you're not worried that they're going to out mass produce us of drones, maybe you are. Are you more worried that they're going to have the more sophisticated, capable drones? And that then becomes their ability to project power that we can't resist?
It's interesting in that, I do worry about China and Russia and those that are trying to get ahead, trying to steal a march on us in terms of developing more and better drones of the type we're seeing today, right? But what I worry even more about is all the emerging threats, even to them, that are likely to swamp the current balance of power, if you will, in the world as a result of the really bottom-up disruptive nature of this change, which I don't think they have grasped any better than we have yet.
The natural global proliferation of the technology.
And the fact that this technology really levels the playing field to an extent that I don't think we're that comfortable with, and is going to let many, many new players that we have not necessarily taken seriously before suddenly come after us with capabilities that may be much more potent than any we had expected. I think, going back to that PC analogy, the natural market, the natural customers for those PCs were not necessarily the customers for the mainframes, right? They were for everyone who wanted to compete with those mainframe owning companies and get the same capabilities for themselves. In the same sense, I worry that the natural customers for this whole wave of small, smart, cheap precision weapons are not the leading edge, top dominant militaries such as ourselves, but those who are looking to defeat leading edge dominant militaries.
One of the things I like about the book, and I mentioned this, is that you do tap into your technical background and maybe a little bit into your staff background. The grumpiness comes out occasionally in the book. And so with any new technology, including with AI, we're in constant cycles of hype and then despair, funding and no funding. And right now we're absolutely in a cycle of hype and excitement. So bring us all a little bit back to reality. And the book does a good job of this. What do you describe some of the limitations that you see in our AI-enabled systems that we have and are developing now?
Yeah, so when it comes to AI, just like robotics, has a longer history than people understand, right? It didn't just appear 10 years ago, and it's been a long march to get here, and it's going to be a long march from here, even though some of the things that the current revolution in AI, which is based upon deep learning, have enabled are really very surprising, right? So started out with the triumphs of deep learning AI systems in board games like chess and Go, and then those have been applied to more and more things. There's so many. It's a process of scaled learning using neural nets and pattern recognition and so forth. And as it turns out, many things can be cast as pattern recognition problems, or in many cases, pattern recognition and repetition problems when you get to things like generative AI. But the common denominator for all those gee whiz things that we're seeing is they all take place in very orderly, bounded, digital environments, in the virtual space, if you will, in silico. There is a big difference in trying to translate some of that deep learning based AI to the external fuzzy analog and dirty world, especially that
The
of
real
war.
world.
And the real world of war is perhaps the dirtiest and most volatile, uncertain, confusing, and ambiguous place in all of human experience. And the qualities that the real world battlefield exhibits are exactly those qualities that deep learning AI has the most trouble dealing with. So I really think that, while AI is undoubtedly having an impact and will have an impact on war in a lot of areas, we mustn't get ahead of ourselves in thinking that it's going to result in, Arnold Schwarzenegger-like Terminators and things like that immediately, because there are fundamental problems or weaknesses with deep learning AI, which is what's driving the current wave of hype when you try to apply it to those environments. I think one of the great stories that I illustrate this with in the book is the difference between the alpha dogfight trials, which DARPA famously did, right, which was a AI-powered virtual pilot facing a human inside of a simulator, basically inside of a computer environment. Just like in a board game, the computer-controlled player or the AI player beat the human, relentlessly. But at the same time, the World Drone Racing Circuit started their AI Racing League, saying that, hey, this is so cool, we should have AI racers compete against each other and against human players as well. That was the inverse, trying to take AI deep learning systems and put them into the real physical world. Even in that case, just a simple physical world, a very basic sort of a studio with some gates in it, not even anywhere near as complex as their normal racing circuits were. But those highly trained AI-driven drones, in many cases, couldn't make it through more than one gate without crashing to the ground. And that really hammered home for a lot of the teams that were working on it, how big a gulf there is between doing something great within a computer, like with generative AI, and trying to translate that to the messy reality of the real world.
Yeah, the autonomous systems that have been tried in battle bots have experienced similar failure. You still can't beat the guys controlling their robots. One of the things that I love when you talk about limitations of these systems is the analogy you draw to military working dogs and comparing autonomous systems to working dogs. Can you sort of talk through how we can use the dogs as an example of looking at potentially some of these limitations?
Yeah, I think it's easy to get pessimistic, if you will, looking at pop culture and other things, because the model that seems to be constantly on offer is that ultimately AI is going to control everything, like the computer in war games or the Skynet from the Terminators, and that whether we're going there fast or slow, that's ultimately where we're all headed, and it's a path to a kind of a sci-fi dystopia. But that really is not the case. In fact, I think the reality of AI and warfare points us towards a completely different direction, one that's much more bottom-up and based on human-machine teaming, to allow robots to do what they do well and to allow humans to do what we do well, and recognize that war is not going to change to suit technology. The technology is going to have to go to where war really is. And the best model I have for that is, as you pointed out, we have a great example of human intelligence teaming with a non-human intelligence to accomplish amazing things that don't lead to a dystopian version of war, but work extremely well in actual real war and have led to all kinds of positive outcomes, but B, actually make war more humane, more ethical, and in many ways less grim than it would be had they not been involved. And that's, of course, the military working dog. And I think that they pose a great model for what we might strive for in future military robots in terms of their basic qualities. They do not exhibit the characteristics such as opacity, brittleness, and greed for data that deep learning AI does. They have the ability to handle ambiguity. They have an amazing ability to team with humans, not just passively, but they actively can do such things as read human expressions, human moods, track the human gaze. As some of the top military dog trainers point out, the dog learns the handler faster than the handler learns the dog. I think there are an awful lot of things we can learn or try to emulate in that really successful relationship that can take us both towards a future of greater military success, but also one of more humane, a more hopeful future.
It used to be that we used to think about robotics and limit it to things that were, it's going to be good at things that we consider dull, dirty, and dangerous. We're at least past that stage of thinking, right?
I think so. I really cringe every time I hear the term unmanned something, right? Because that reminds me so much of the very, very early stage of mechanization when we talked about horseless things, horseless carriage, which was the early automobile, horseless tiller, which was the tractor. But as long as we are in the stage of saying, oh, we're making unmanned aircraft, unmanned...
You're still making an aircraft.
Yeah, you're still making the stuff from the previous generation, right? We haven't yet embraced the fundamental change. Once we get to that point where we are fielding systems for which there was never a pre-robotic version of that, could not have existed in pre-robotic form, then I know we're starting to get out of that first wave and maybe into the second wave, which is hopeful, because that's where the opportunity lies for us as the U.S. and the U.S. defense industry to get out of that attrition warfare trap and back into potentially a position of dominance and of a way of winning wars that does not just rely upon outbleeding the other side.
The other limitation I'd love for you to touch on is the more psychological limitation. You talk about the ability for a human to have sort of a better sense of itself, and that becoming very important, especially in some of these combat scenarios. Where are we, and why is it a bad thing maybe that AI-enabled robotics doesn't have so much of a sense of itself?
Yeah, it's remarkable the extent to which deep learning AI doesn't know what it doesn't know. We talk a lot about hallucinations and the tendency of AI to be confidently wrong, just because it lacks that awareness of itself and what it doesn't know, right? There's no humility in an AI system. And that has ramifications for military combat, certainly. I talk a little bit in the book about the concept of just understanding the context of what you're doing in a military operation, right? If you have a squad of soldiers, and we all know this from movies and television, advancing on an objective, right? Sneaking forward. Once they get close enough to see the objective close up, maybe the squad leader raises his hand, tells the rest of the squad to stop, right? Silently, because something doesn't look right, right? He or she can see something's wrong. And it could be anything. It could be, they see one of their allies is actually among the enemies, or there are children with them, or maybe just the objective when they get close to it is not what they thought it was. But in any case, they recognize that something is wrong, and then the entire mission goes off in a different direction, right? But the ability to make that assessment that something is wrong is so critical in the real world of actual combat, not just for military effectiveness, right? But also for ethics, because that ability to make that judgment, if you're trying to do a drone strike with a Reaper drone, or conduct any other type of a precision strike, to be able to see, something's wrong and not pull the trigger is critical for making sure that we have ethics in warfare. And that requires such a rich understanding of reality in a way that no AI system has, that it requires, to make that judgment requires a person to be able to have such a rich sense of what should be there that they can notice when what should be there is not, or what something is not as it should be. And that is still many levels above where AI is today. So, I think AI is far from done. We've got a long way to go and a lot of exciting new research to get us to that point. And it's not going to happen overnight.
So the book does get into what we can do to better handle the changes that you're talking about and better deal with the threats and take advantage of the opportunities you talk about. So Talk about some of the what ideas that you have in the book.
Well, I think one of the most important things we can do that would solve a lot of our problems is rediscover how to launch prototype units. Now, if you look back at our own history of leading so many disruptive technology changes through the past 100 years, from aircraft carriers to stealth aircraft to maneuver warfare, we did that by developing and fielding prototype units, which is not something we do anymore. It's been 40 years since the last time we did that. The last one that we intentionally stood up was the unit that was fielding the F-117 stealth fighter. But a prototype unit is not a unit that does prototyping, right? It is itself a combat unit of the new type that will use that new invention to conduct combat operations. And its mission is to take that, say the early prototypes of that weapon system, learn everything about them that is important, not just in terms of what features they should have, but how to use them and employ them in tactics, in real world military operations. Use that to partner with industry on a very rapid iterative cycle to inform the next generation of technologies so that you evolve very, very quickly. And the result is a actual fieldable capability that has been forced to overcome all those barriers that you don't encounter or even understand well enough to solve until you really have to get something to work in the field.
But you're not talking about a guard unit trying out DARPA's latest VR goggles in their weekend.
No. If you can deploy tech to an existing unit, then it's not really that disruptive. I'm talking about something that is so significant that it changes the way a unit would fight fundamentally and requires a new type of unit. And that's what we need to do with a lot of these robotic concepts. I think that is why we are stuck in analysis paralysis in a lot of these areas, because we cannot determine what the right requirements are. We cannot develop a constituency within a service that is ready to advocate for something because it hasn't crossed the valley of death yet. But crossing that valley of death is why prototype units were used in the past. One good example is going to the Army. There was a question of, could helicopters be useful in combat, right? They've been used for transport, but they've never been used for combat. The Army stood up a prototype unit and said, your job is to evaluate the current generation of helicopters, see what the best way to use them in combat might be, make a deployable unit that we can actually use in combat within, say, 40 months, and then use that as the model for all future air assault units that would come. That first air assault unit actually became the first air cavalry division after only less than 3 years as a prototype unit. It was the first full division deployed to Vietnam and was engaged in the Battle of Ia Drang, which is the one that was featured in that movie, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. That was a prototype unit that was stood up only a few years before. But that's how quickly they were able to take a general bright idea like, hey, could we use helicopters to conduct offensive combat operations and convert it into a fielded capability that then has really crossed that valley of death. I actually got another paper on this coming out sometime soon that goes into it in more detail. But I think if there was one policy change that I would recommend that would really have a huge lever effect, I think that would be it.
So NDIA members range from big system integrator companies, commercial companies, software companies feeding into the drones, drone manufacturers, government personnel, for that wide audience, and they want to get involved in this kind of conversation, shape the future. Where do you think is the place that they should be engaging right now?
Well, if prototype units exist, that would be a great place for them to engage, right? Because they are right-sized to partner with small, innovative industry. They don't exist yet, but hopefully they will. But it's a great time to be a smaller defense tech company right now because there's this whole parallel new defense industrial base in a way growing beside the one that we already have as our legacy industrial base. We're going to end up having to grow that as let's say a separate but equal branch until it starts to perhaps cannibalize some of the missions that our traditional industrial base has. one of the places where I know we're going to be talking about this a lot is in the Emerging Technologies for Defense conference, which is coming right up next month, which I will be speaking at and helping to contribute a little bit to that debate.
Yeah, so George will be speaking at the conference at the end of the month, at the end of August, and beyond the hearing you talk about it at the conference, if people want to go out and get the book now, and I have my own hard copy at this moment, where can people get the book?
Yeah, so we are doing a book launch events for those who are watching who are in the DC area at Kramer Books in DuPont Circle on the 26th of August. If you are in this region, please come out. But otherwise, it is being launched on the 26th, basically nationwide. All of your normal book selling places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and so forth, carry it. If you don't have a small local bookstore like Kramer's near you, there are many ways to get it that way. There are international editions already in the works. Most recently, the book is going to be coming out in Ukrainian, in Korean, and I've recently found that it's being picked up for mass distribution by Walmart and Target. So there are going to be a lot of places you can find it. Read it before your friends do.
Congratulations on all of that. George Dougherty is the author of the forthcoming book, Beast in the Machine, How Robotics and AI Will Transform Warfare and the Future of Human Conflict. George, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
With that, I want to make sure everybody visits ETI's website to sign up for our mailing list and register for our various webinars, events, and educational offerings, including our Tech 101 series. Please visit our YouTube channel at Emerging Tech ETI to see all of our past podcasts, webinars, and other content. You can also get our podcast anywhere where you get your podcast. NDIA is hosting the third NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference and Exhibition. It's going to be held August 27th through 29th at the DC Convention Center. So you can go to the book signing on August 26th and show up at the Convention Center on August 27th. That's perfect. This year, we're going to be joined by Vice Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Christopher Grady, General Alex Grynkewich, the Commander of U.S. European Command, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Michael Duffey, as well as the Undersecretary for Defense for Research and Engineering, Emil Michael, as our set of keynote speakers. That's on top of our numerous other keynote speakers from government and industry, a wide set of breakout panels, networking sessions, one-on-one industry government meeting sessions, even a classified track, and much more. Join us and our partners from OSD, CDAO, the services, and multiple COCOMs that are working with us like EUCOM, AFRICOM, and NORTHCOM for a conference you do not want to miss. And George will be there as well. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to learn more and register now. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please don't forget to like our episodes and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our latest content. We're, like I said, available on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Special thank you to Melanie Yu, Daniel Park, and Logan the Intern for producing this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into Emerging Tech Horizons.